The mechanics of non-physical reality, a model. Section 6. The end is always the beginning. Today is the first day of the rest of your existence. Synopsis of Book 1 and Book 2. Book I, Awake 11I11G, Section LL provides a partial biography of the author that is pertinent to the subsequent creation of this trilogy. This brief look at the author's unique experience and credentials sheds some light upon the origins of this extraordinary work. The unusual associations, circumstances, training, and research that eventually led to the creation of the My Big Picture theory of Eve 1 Youthing, My Big TOE, trilogy are described to provide a more accurate perspective of the whole. Book L, Awakening 11G, Section 2 lays out, logically justifies, and defines the basic conceptual building blocks needed to construct My Big TOE's conceptual foundation. It discusses the cultural beliefs that trap our thinking into a narrow and limited conceptualization of reality, defines the basics of big picture epistemology and ontology, as well as examines the nature and practice of meditation. Most importantly, Section 2 defines and develops the two fundamental assumptions upon which this trilogy is based, a high-entropy primordial consciousness energy form called AUO, absolute unbounded oneness, and the fundamental process of evolution. AUO eventually evolves to become a much lower NUOP consciousness energy form called AUM, absolute unbounded manifold, though neither is absolute or unbounded. Using only these two assumptions, Section 2 logically infers the nature of time, space, and consciousness as well as describes the basic properties, purpose, and mechanics of our real ITY. Additionally, Section 2 develops the concepts of the big computer, TBC, and the even bigger computer, EBC, as operational model of aware digital consciousness. Our system, OS, is defined to be PMR, physical matter reality, our physical universe, plus the subset of NPMRR, a specific part of non-physical matter reality, NPMR, that is interactive with PMR. Many of the Concept 5 initiated in Section 2 are more fully explained in later sections. 630 My Big TOE Inner Workings. Book 2, Discovery, Section 3 develops the interface and interaction between we the people and our digital consciousness reality. LT derives and explains the characteristics, origins, dynamics, and function of ego, love, free will, and our larger purpose. This section introduces us to the consciousness evolution fractal ecosystem of which we are a part and explains how we can optimize our interaction within that system to actualize our full potential as an individuated consciousness. Additionally, Section 3 builds a bridge between your present assumptions about the physical and spiritual reality you think you live in, a reality limited by your cultural and personal beliefs, and My Big Picture theory of everything, My Big TOE. TI1E nature of a larger reality that exists beyond your physical perception is described in detail. Spirituality and love are technically defined as functions of NUOP content within consciousness. Paranormal activity is given a theoretical basis as a normal part of a larger science. Finally, Section 3 develops the psi uncertainty principle as it explains and interrelates psi phenomena, free will, love, consciousness evolution, physics, reality, human purpose, digital computation, and entropy. Book 2, Discovery, Section 4 describes an operational and functional model of consciousness that further develops the results of Section 3 and supports the conclusions of Section 5. The origins and nature of digital consciousness are described along with how artificial intelligence, AL, as embodied in algae, leads to artificial consciousness, which leads to actual consciousness and to us. The design criteria, features, and limitations of our personal consciousness are E-planed and related to the larger digital reality. 1L1E part we play within the whole is derived as the physical universe is shown to be a local reality within a larger multidimensional system of digital synergy. The concepts of physical and non-physical are shown to be relative to the observer and to CHATI no intrinsic significance of their own. Section 4 derives our physical universe, our science, and our perception of a physical reality. The mind-mat.er dichotomy is solved as both our physical reality and the larger reality are directly derived from a large but finite system of digital energy that evolves an organized content called consciousness. Section 5. Inner space, the final frontier. The mechanics of non-physical reality, a model. 73. Introduction to Section 5. In Sections 2, 3, and 4, I have developed the basic concepts needed to gain a fundamental understanding of the larger reality. In this section, those concepts serve as the necessary background required to produce a WP-level understanding of PMR and PMR interface dynamics. You will have make most of the connections between the earlier sections and this section on your own. If I were to point out all the places where concepts of previous sections are being applied, it would add so many references to Section 5 you would have difficulty staying focused. In Section 5 we will regress to a more PMR-centric view that should be more familiar and less abstract, develop a description of OS reality mechanics, and afterward explore some of its more interesting ramifications. This section will begin by reviewing from a more analytic perspective some of what we have previously learned. This conceptual review will set the stage for a challenging exposition of the fundamental processes of the larger reality. Section 5 will be a little more buttoned down and logically formal, a little more technical and precise, but don't let that put you off. After the heavy brain work is done formulating the fundamentals of NPMR Mechan ICS, we will have some fun exploring some of the cooler ramifications. The following 12 chapters, which deliver the content of Section 5, are a subset of my observations relevant to describing the mechanics of the larger reality in which we all exist. They are carefully constructed from my experience in physical matter reality, PMR, and non-physical matter reality, NPMR. This is a broad brush across the top of this subject, a first pass so that you can tell if you want to dig deeper on your own. Feigny interesting and important concepts are purposely neglected because they 634 my big TOE inner workings fall beyond the scope of this effort to present a comprehensive model of how the larger reality works. With a subject as broad as this one, the mechanics of reality, one have no choice but to remain focused so that you are not overwhelmed with endless digressions nor a work that is too ponderous to ponder. Please keep in mind that the point of developing a consistent big-picture model of reality is not to convince or persuade you of the correctness of my interpretation of my experience, and thereby offer you something better or more accurate to believe concerning the nature of reality. After many years of careful exploration, I have merely organized my observations into a coherent and consistent pattern. The resulting structure is the Big TOE reality model presented in this section. My intent is that the overall model of reality described by the My Big TOE trilogy should be a model that you can apply. It should be practical as well as theoretical. Its primary usefulness lies in its ability to help you meet and solve some of your most daunting professional and personal challenges. Second, it provides a logical unified theoretical understanding of the reality of which you are a pen. If you are a scientist or philosopher, it is this secondary usefulness that will seem most important. It is not. You will, most likely, depart the My Big TOE experience with something that was not there before, something that reflects your personal experience, understanding, and quality. Take from it whatever you can. Leave behind whatever does not square with your sense of what is right. Have no fear, you will not end up where you do not belong. The first 4 relatively short chapters of this book WIJI provide a quick review and wrap-up of the concepts developed in the first 2 books of this trilogy, as well as provide the proper perspective that you will need to optimize your understanding of the reality model presented in chapters 5 through 10. This review is primarily intended for those that have not yet read Book L or Book 2. If you have recently read the first 2 books, you may wish to skim the next 3 chapters, spending time only on those concepts that are of particular interest to you. Chapters 5 through 10 are more conceptually challenging. If you get stuck, simply continue to skip paragraphs until it gets easier, or more interesting, again. Book 3 not only presents the mechanics of reality, but also explores and describes some of its consequences. In the process of doing so, it touches on fun subjects including time travel, teleportation, and telepathy, the simultaneity of past, present, and future, how the past continues to live, changing the past, warp drives, faster than light travel or communications, the Book 3, Section 5, Chapter 73 I 635. Concept of an even bigger computer, EBC, the nature of NPMR and its beings, probable realities, precognition and future expectations, changing the probability of occurrence of future events, multiple projections of you, leaving T.EPMR body behind, creating multiple bodies, understanding real ITY as a consciousness evolution fractal, and many other interesting subjects. 74. Science, truth, knowledge, reality, and you. My big toe describes a model, a relational logical structure, that defines the forms, functions, and processes that constitute your larger real. The approach is scientific. Use the word science in its original and most general sense, TI1E observation, identification, description, experimental investigation, and theoretical explanation of phenomena. The observations have been accumulated and the investigations undertaken by the author during the past 30 years. It is experience, not faith, which is required to transform the information found here into knowledge, and to evaluate its significance to you. You must find your own meaning in it. If what you find here does not resonate with your inner knowledge, or if it only resonates with anger or other negative feelings, let it go. Toss the book out. And forget about it. It is not our time to connect. Learning cannot and should not be forced. Each individual must grow in his own way, on his own path, under his own power and initiative. The world is big enough for everyone if moral respect is given to personal differences. Inasmuch as being careful, vigilant, and practicing good science can make it possible, this effort is based entirely on my direct first-hand experience. It is not based on my beliefs or on what I may have surmised from others. The influence of philosophical bias, preconceived notions, or beliefs has been, to the best of my ability, eliminated or at least minimized. The data upon which this model is based represent my best objective evaluation of my subjective experience. If you think the previous sentence contains an oxymoron, that an objective evaluation of subjective experience is impossible, you probably 638 My big toe science, truth, knowledge, reality, and you have too narrow a definition of the word objective and may be muddling through the most important parts of your life, ignoring objective feedback that is the result of subjective interpretation of apparently objective perceptions. Results can be objectively measured even if the motivations, understanding, and intent, the underlying dynamics, that created those results are entirely subjective. Unique, stable, repeatable, recognizable subjective states often drive specific objective results. This is the normal mode of operation for most individuals. Consider some of the correct, objective conclusions or knowledge, truth, you have come or gained, from your subjectively driven and interpreted interactions with friends, family members, lovers, spouses, children, bosses, or parents, and from the subjective evaluation of the direction, substance, and quality of your light. Consider that useful logical conclusions may flow from inductive as well as deductive reasoning. If you are still in a logical dilemma about the possibility of deriving one, objective knowledge, from subjective experience, reread Chapter 13, Book 2 before going on. Further explanation of how subjective experience can produce objective results is presented in the next chapter. This trilogy, as with all sincere science, has universal truth as its goal, a goal that is, unfortunately, always difficult, if not impossible, co-guarantee. The correctness of this model, as with all scientific models, the shell model of the atom, for example, must be judged by its ability to explain the existing data within a self-consistent and coherent system. If you are not sure how that might be accomplished, evaluating the correctness of this model, it might be a good idea to reread Chapter 14, Book 2. The nature of the existing data that describes the facts of real JD is unique enough. 1.0 requires some further discussion. It is a common mistake to confuse the larger reality itself with the objects that appear to lie within it. We shall see that this error produces a limiting view that extends only as far as our senses. It also denies the reality and significance of what is most important below us. The superset of facts, UOTHs, 01 data describing our larger reality must include who and what we are, our subject. I being, our mind, our consciousness, what we perceive through our physical senses, our objective measurements, and the result of interpreting, grading, and synthesizing this data into the unique intellectual, emotional, physical, and spiritual being we call us. Unlike traditional works in either philosophy or science, I make no effort to convince the reader of the goodness of fit of this model lo the existing data. That is not the point. I know this is difficult lo understand. Book 3, Section 5, Chapter 74 I 639. Because it is contrary to how things are normally done, you will need to think out of the box here. Although 1a am formally presenting a scientific TOE of everything with this trilogy, convincing you that my concepts are correct or credible, or that the model is accurate or valuable, is not at all what these books are about. Understanding the content, knowing its UOTH, and the limitations and boundaries of its UR.H at a deep and personal level, must be personally earned, not book learned. It must come through your first-hand experience, not through reading, and being convinced, about results and conclusions based on someone else's experience. What is the point? In addition to offering you a coherent understanding of reality and time, explaining the purpose and significance of your existence, and describing how your world works, this model, in conjunction with your effort, may help you interpret both your objective and subjective reality data, X1ns. Perhaps it will nudge your create some interesting theories of your own, or, by providing some missing pieces of understanding or information, it may help you find explanations to a personal puzzle within your experience. Additionally, it might be a catalyst your learning by expanding the set of possibilities of which you are aware. It may lead, nudge, or goad you to think new thoughts, to evaluate important perspectives, concepts, and ideas that you otherwise wouldn't have considered. My big toe in general or this mechanics of reality section in particular one is not likely to create significant knowledge at a deep or fundamental level where none existed before. Contemplating this book, or any book, is unlikely to change who you are or the quality of your being, and yet at the same time, and most importantly, there is an outside chance it could be the catalyst for you to do exactly that. The personal nature of at least a portion of the data, the facts of real ity, makes the standard argumentative, me convincing you, approach to imparting knowledge productive. This approach would guarantee a failed effort. It would succeed only in starting a non-solvable argument over what constitutes the set of valid existing data. A useless and endless argument for sure. Why? Because what qualifies as the existing data is both objective and subjective, and the subjective portion is unique and personal to each individual's experience and knowledge. Recall chapters 14, 32, and 33 of Book 2. Your consciousness is personal to you, it represents your being, we will call it, its attributes and evolutionary processes being objects. In contrast, Consider 1 your body or other physical objects that can be probed, measured, and tabulated by the intellect and tools of others. We will call these objects shared intellectual objects. 640 I my big toe I science, truth, knowledge, reality, and you. A set of the data relevant to the larger reality must take into account your consciousness as well as your body. Intellectual objects are physical objects, shared public objects, objects that must obey the objective causal ity, space-time rule set, of PMR. Being objects are non-physical and primarily represented by units of individuated consciousness in various states of awareness and quality. A system capable of supporting consciousness spontaneously generates enough SEU organizing potential so that the fundamental process of evolution can, in the pursuit of profitability, generate sufficient synergy, through a process of recursive reorganization called learning, to form an individuated consciousness that is independent of the mechanisms that support it. Consider a digital system's potential to profitably organize itself as constituting a non-physical form of energy such that the system itself becomes an energetic media that the fundamental process can organize and reorganize into successively lower entropy configurations. Being objects are the individual result of the consciousness creation process. Chapters 7 and 23 of Book 2 review these concepts. Reality must be experienced by consciousness. Unlike the intellectual objects, material facts, and ideas, of traditional Western science that can be shared, being objects or unique states of being are primarily experienced through subjective personal awareness. To understand the knowledge, data, and facts of being, the being objects, you must be them, you must reflect, express, or integrate them in your being. So, what is the point of my big toe intellectually discussing being objects? Because knowing about it, though not to be confused with being it, can be valuable in and of itself. Consider the difference between wisdom and knowledge. Knowledge is generally good to have and it is required in order to apply wisdom, but wisdom is much more than merely better, or more complete, knowledge. Have you ever heard of a little wisdom being a dangerous thing? In addition to knowledge, wisdom requires big picture understanding and caring at a deep level. Both are attributes of experience and being rather than attributes of information. With the right information you might occasionally act wisely, but that is not at all the same as being wise. Experience, not verbal communication, is the doorway through which personal subjective knowing must pass. One who is successful at acquiring, assimilating, and manipulating intellectual objects is said to be knowledgeable and is capable of doing great things, has good quality ideas. In contrast, one who has successfully evolved low entropy being objects is said to be wise and capable of being a great person, has good spiritual. Book 3, Section 5, Chapter 74 I 641. Quality. Each of us should develop both of Chi's mutually reinforcing capacities and seek an optimal balance between them. Knowledge without wisdom is common, wisdom without knowledge is impossible. Knowledge is about facts, wisdom understands how those facts relate and interact. Within the big picture, intellectual objects are separable and can be arranged like beads on a thread. Being objects are individualized subsets of one whole integrated thing, more like the thread itself. Unfortunately, learning to manipulate intellectual or material objects is seen as real, rational, and scientific. The scientific method is used to separate fact from fiction among intellectual objects, while learning to manipulate being objects is seen as non-real, delusional, irrational, and unscientific. Just as classical mechanics makes hopelessly wrong inferences in the realms of the very small and very fast, the scientific method has little validity outside its realm of intellectual objects. The scientific method we learn to venerate for its proven ability to deliver the truth is an excellent methodology for exploring Newton's mechanistic universe as well as Einstein's relative universe. However, a digital, quantized, statistical reality, somewhat like the one described by quantum mechanics, based upon the constraints of our knowing, needs a broader scientific methodology that allows for the necessity of uncertainty. Such a generalized scientific method will allow a larger, more porous truth to be derived from uncertain statistical data manipulated by inductive as well as deductive reasoning. Living with uncertainty is fundamental to your progress and growth. It is the way of the future, scientifically and personally, and you might as well get used to it. A mechanistic one-ility over which we eventually learn, through science, to exert control represents a limited local reality. Uncertainty is not a problem for science as long as the uncertain results are represented in our physical reality by something, a physical component 01 manifestation, that is clearly measurable, consistent, and uniquely related to its source. To apply the requirements of the current science of intellectual and material objects to the science of being is to deny the existence of the latter. Turning the scientific method into a universal dogma, science as religion, enforces an inappropriate process and measure of value upon the science of being. By the standards of traditional science, the science of being will, by definition, always seem delusional, non-provable, and unassailable, the realm of charlatans, kooks, and other silly or devious people. People in general, Western science and philosophy in particular, are ill-equipped and ill-prepared. Crack the nut of mind, being, psi, paranormal. 642 My big TOE science, truth, knowledge, reality, and you. Phenomena, love, or of spirituality. Nor are they likely to understand how these things interconnect with each other, the physical world, and us, collectively and individually. Not until individuals, particularly scientists, learn to and think outside the box, the philosophical corner they have dogmatically painted themselves into, will the science of consciousness become available for our use. For these reasons, I will leave the analysis of the model's goodness of fit to existing data and previously acquired knowledge up to those who have enough honest, not generated from fear, dogma, or belief, experiential data points to make the exercise meaningful. The motor's value for those without first-hand experience of the larger reality lies in its ability to provide a comprehensive theoretical model of existence, and in providing a tool that can be used to logically extend one's experience beyond present knowledge. The exploration of inner space is greatly facilitated by the encouragement and assurances of those who have gone before, and by having a good map and description of the laboratory. The value of my big toe is entirely dependent on the essential one-ectness of its representation. You should gather up your objective, public, experience and integrate it with your objectively evaluated subjective, private, experience to assess this toe's value for yourself. You could evaluate only the public part, but that would be like inventing an automobile and only using it to crack walnuts by driving back and forth over them one at a time. Surely, you can use a car as a nutcracker, but why would you want to do that? Wouldn't you rather use your car to go somewhere interesting, explore the big picture perhaps? Cracking those walnuts is simply not that important. Lift up your head and look around. There is an entire reality out there, let the nuts go for a while. For each individual sentient being, life's most important and meaningful experiences are typically subjective. Significance, relative to the being objects, or relative to the quality of an individual's being, is derived primarily from subjective experience. Consequently, it is important to keep the following two things in mind, both apply to you, as well as to me. 1. The ignorant are never aware of their ignorance, and 2. It is highly likely there are individuals who possess more experience, understanding, wisdom, and truth than you do. How can you discover which individuals know more, and are more, than what you know and what you are, represent a higher quality of being, contain less imropy, or are more spiritually evolved? Likewise, how can you discover which ones know less, and are less, than what you know and what you are? Book 3, Section 5, Chapter 74 I 643. Given that you do not believe yourself to be omniscient, a typically ego or fear-driven know-it-all, you can only attempt to sort out the resultant confusion, separating the wise from the foolish, by gaining direct, carefully sorted, tested, MD-validated first-hand experience. Experience is the key because of the personal nature of the subject. You must personally experience the larger reality, there is no other way to interact or to absorb it. Nevertheless, if you are not careful how you evaluate and interpret your subjective experience, you could still end up in the self-delusional fool category. If instead, you separate the wise from the foolish by applying your beliefs, you logically risk being merely a self-consistent fool, or one fool among many, an invisible fool, if your beliefs are shared by others. Separating the wise from the foolish is no easy task, but it is one at which you can succeed if you try. Recall that in Chapter 14, Book 2 we offered a detailed solution to this epistemological dilemma. In the science of being, unlike the science of objects, consensus does not define the accepted truth, much less the actual truth. Experience is personal and can never be shared exactly. An event or happening can be shared, simultaneously viewed, by many individuals, but TL1E experience of it is unique to each individual. Consequently, there are many ways an individual can view, and interact with, the same truth. What you do with the truth you discover is the point. How will you use it to enhance the quality of your being? Functionality, what can be done with it, and results, how it actually helps you grow or evolve your consciousness quality, are the measures of the value of your knowledge, not how many people agree with you. Big truth does not rearrange itself to fit the whims or demands of the fashionable majority. My experience, knowledge, and understanding are important to you only if they help you find knowledge, and experience truth in your own way. Your and my understanding of the right way, and of how things work, may or may not be helpful to others. If we think that our experience and the knowledge derived therefrom might be helpful, we should share it, but never impose it, require it, or think it is the critical information that others need. Nor should we make it our goal to ensure that others recognize its universality. That is evangelism, not science. The science of being is an individual science that cannot be advanced through a group effort. Its significance lies in its results, in the effect it has on the quality of the individual and on that individual's ability and willingness to profitably evolve his or her personal consciousness. As you read this section, focus on the common understanding, not the differences, between this model and other concepts of reality. Reach for the 644 My Big TOE Science, Truth, Knowledge, Reality, and You. Biggest picture your personal data can logical support, but be careful to avoid imitating the proverbial blind men who jump to conclusions about the characteristics of an elephant from the one part of the whole that they experience. Keep in mind that yours and mine, experience is probably incomplete. Conclusions should remain flexible, tentative, be given varying degrees of credibility based upon our experience, and remain always open to the possibility of gaining more data, understanding, in the future. Either believing or disbelieving what you read here would be a futile act, a compulsion that cannot induce personal growth. My aim is to expand the possibilities that inhabit your mind, to provide you with a mode that helps you place your experience into a larger context, and that encourages you, by explaining the scope, structure, and content of a larger reality, explore and find truth. I hope that you 16 find freedom and empowerment in the idea that you create, as well as limit, your own reality, and find comfort in the vastness of the possibilities and potential that you have to satisfy the fundamental purpose of your being. Let me be dear that my big toe in general, or the mechanics of real ity presented in this section in particular, do not philosophically center about Western science, Eastern religion, spiritualism, New Age philosophy, theosophy, the occult, or any other body of thought or ism. It is simply my experience put in the context of form, function, and process. Though my big toe may logically connect, and occasionally overlap, with many philosophical, scientific, and theological traditions, it represents and has been derived from a unique synthesis of my personal and professional experience. Big truth is, and has always been, the same as it is now, so similarities should be expected. Any associations you might draw connecting the concepts presented in this trilogy to some other body of thought or to another set of concepts are a synthesis of your own brewing, not the specific intention of the author. Make connections, that is good. Intellectual synthesis is helpful and important, but your connections are much more significant than any that might point out to you. Open-minded skepticism is the correct frame of mind with which to proceed through this section, anything else may lead you astray. Do not be predisposed to confirm or deny what you read, or you will likely miss some important points and have a less than optimal learning opportunity. 75. Preliminaries. Though we have previously used the terms PMR and PMR in a general way in previous sections, now we need to become more precise. PMR, physical matter reality, the reality that your body lives in, and its properties, and laws, physics. PVFR includes the material universe, galaxies, solar systems, planets, and everything known and unknown that materially exists within them. PLVLR can be effectively and purposefully manipulated, is operationally viable, and is inhabited by beings that are sentient in it. NPMR, non-physical matter reality, everything other than PMR. The non-material, from the view of PMR, superset of PMR that contains its own unique properties, materials, and laws. Like PMR, NPMR can also be effectively and purposefully manipulated, is operationally viable, and is inhabited by beings that are sentient in it. NPMR contains unique dimensions, material, and time that consistently and necessarily follows its own rules, physics. 1T exists independently of PMR and may contain numerous unique local realities as subsets. These definitions of physical and non-physical were chosen to serve the largest group of people with a minimum of confusion. Both PMR and NPMR are real physical places from the point of view of the consciousness beings that inhabit them. They each contain objects and sentient beings that appear to have substance, form, structure, and energy that are measurable and perceivable and follow the rules, causality, and science, physics, peculiar to their respective realms. The apparent difference between non-physical and physical is relative to the observer. From within a given local reality, a specific dimension of AUM or TBC, everything within that reality appears physical while everything outside of that reality appears non-physical. 646 My big TOE preliminaries. Defining NPMR as non-physical is a parochial PMR-centric view that implies our physical PWLL science is fundamentally incapable of expanding its vision to include NPMR as a part of our physical reality. Simply moving beyond the limited idea that PMR defines all possible reality will open up new worlds of potential existence to exploration and study. Breakthroughs must always begin with the unthinkable. Most people are comfortable with the fuzzy notion that what we can directly measure, with our five senses and their extensions by our marvelous machines of science, in PMR is by definition physical and everything else is non-physical. This is sometimes called the operational definition of physical reality. This places two familiar groups of things into the non-physical camp, those that are inferred but not yet directly measurable, neutrinos for example, and those that are conceptual, such as wave packets, dark matter, strings as in physics theory, as well as ego, love, ethics, and justice. Inferred entities can only be indirectly measured by actually measuring something else that is assumed to be causally related. Conceptual things, such as justice or wave packets, are inferred. Initially, conceptual entities are defined into existence, as were neutrinos or quarks, by our need for them to support and maintain the consistency of our new rent worldview. TI1EIR operational functionality and their ability to help us maintain logical consistency is accepted as proof of their potential physical reality. We take them seriously because they help us define, understand, and control our local reality. They are operationally significant. 171 At they are entirely operationally non-physical, cannot be directly measured, only relegates their existence to the theoretical, not to the absurd. 171 EY are in the wings waiting for scientific experience. T0 give them full membership into the world of the physically measurable, or at least into the world of things with physically measurable effects. Thus it is with mind, consciousness, and intuition. All operationally significant, all with indirectly measurable effects. Non-physical does not mean non-useful, non-real, 01 non-existent. Non-physical things are often defined by, are real and meaningful because of, their effective use, their application, their interaction with measurable things, and their ability to satisfy, fit, or be consistent with, the current overarching model from which their reality, existence, and meaningfulness is derived. They are directly inferred from basic assumptions about the nature of reality. The beings, objects, and energy in NPMR are directly inferred in the same way. Anyone can easily learn low-C unique and specific energy forms with the mind's eye, manipulate the energy of creation, and communicate telepathically with beings in NPMR or PMR. However, whether or NOL. Book 3, Section 5, Chapter 75 I 647. These activities can be considered real and meaningful depends upon their effective use, their application, their interaction with measurable things, and their ability to satisfy, fit, or be consistent with an overarching model. Overarching models of being are in short supply. Current efforts are typically incomplete or narrowly dogmatic. Ontology, the branch of metaphysics that deals with the nature of being, is not taken seriously by many philosophers or scientists because it is considered to be beyond objective discourse. They are half right. A comprehensive model of being like the one presented in the My Big Toe trilogy is beyond the causal logic of the little picture, but rather than decree that no logical objective solution can possibly exist, science and philosophy would be better served by open-mindedly searching for a more general view that would broaden its understanding. Perhaps, with an open-minded approach, scientists and philosophers could find a bigger picture that contains a logical solution that answers to a higher level, more general superset, of objective causality. Unfortunately, it is easier and more immediately rewarding to decree the impossibility of difficult-to-understand solutions, or posit belief-based pseudo-solutions, than to live with the nagging uncertainty that is required to find one-eel solutions through better science. We have been struggling to understand the big picture in Western Cu-1e for at least 2,700 years with only spotty success because our materialistically based belief system blocks genuine progress. Big picture models cannot be taken seriously in our westernized technoculture because of a pervasive little picture objectivity iberalstilus.ion. The world, and particularly the Western world, desperately needs a big toe to provide balance and stability. A living the is one that embraces change and the possibility of new and contradictory knowledge, as opposed to being an impossible low change, know-it-all dead dogma. Big picture models of being, reality, or existence must be in the process of evolving big truth. In the same sense, most physical models, modern physics theories, are also living. Dead models, if correct, must be small in scope. A model that is broad in application and far-ranging in its consequences, large scope, must remain open to the idea of redefining itself periodically or risk degenerating into a belief-based old dogma that is incapable of learning new tricks. There is always more to learn. How can we claim completion when AUM is still learning and growing? Believing that your uncertain ignorance is small compared to your certain knowledge is the signature assumption of fools. In the simplest sense, and at the most basic level of understanding, the non-physical being objects in NPMR are important because they are sig. 1 http://www.my-big-toe.com 648 My Big Toe preliminaries. Significant and valuable to individuals. Ti1EY consistently, powerfully, clearly, and measurably can, and do, contribute to your consciousness quality and the evolvement of your being. These non-physical being objects and processes influence, interact with, your being whether you are aware of it or not. The advantage of being aware of the interface and interaction you have with one NPMR is that this awareness can dramatically raise the efficiency of the experience knowledge growth transfer function. The bottom line is that NP.MR, just like neutrinos, is inferred from repeatable consistent results that are indirectly measurable in PMR by independent researchers. My Big Toe develops the notion of NPMR as part of an overarching consistent scientific theory of reality that includes PMR and its physics as a subset. Though this section is purposely developed from a PMR Senu IC viewpoint to enhance comprehension at a more familiar level, hang on to your larger perspective and integrate what you find here with whatever constitutes your biggest picture. As we pointed out toward the end of Book 2, PMR and NPMR are dimensions or subsets of one reality as seen from differing points of view. The terms physical and non-physical have no intrinsic meaning beyond describing a local belief-based delusional perception of other realities relative to one's own. There is no primary physical reality just as there is no primary inertial frame in relativity theory. There is but one reality that can be viewed from many different perspectives. Same old story, relativity of perception, repeated at a one-higher level of generality. From Newton to Einstein, physicists believed that space and time were absolute. Einstein's vision was the first to transcend the universally accepted paradigm of an absolute, or fundamental, inertial frame. Consequently, he was able to see the relativity of, or the relationship between, multiple inertial frames will look like an all-encompassing space-time. The concept of space-time was born of a bigger picture understanding that could appreciate the interconnected relationships of multiple equivalent inertial phenomena instead of seeing reality as one monolithic absolute inertial frame. Physicists following the trail that Einstein blazed, beyond the conceptual restrictions of absolute space and time, committed the same error at the next level of generality by developing an implicit assumption that space-time was the new absolute. When we reach the outer limit of our vision, we think we see the absolute. What we imagine as the absolute, the final source, the ultimate fundamental, is only an artifact of our limited understanding. As Einstein vividly demonstrated, one can never see the new relativity until one's vision has grown beyond the old absolute. Neither Einstein nor others could conceptualize anything beyond space-time. That limitation of vision prevented them from c. Book 3, Section 5, Chapter 75 I 649. I.ng The next higher level of relativity where one can appreciate the interconnected relationships of multiple equivalent spacetimes instead of one monolithic absolute spacetime, multiple PMRs. The next step beyond that, the next higher level of relativity, requires a larger vision where one can appreciate the interconnected relationships of multiple equivalent realities within AL.TM, multiple PMRs and NPMRs, from our perspective, within a consciousness system like NPVern instead of one monolithic absolute set of virtual spacetimes. Ending one's vision to the next higher level of relativity, one can appreciate the interconnected relationships of the multiple levels and scales of a consciousness evolution process fractal that defines the evolving consciousness system of which we are a part instead of one monolithic set of hierarchical virtual realities based upon an absolute AUM. Undoubtedly, describing 5 hierarchical levels of relativity theory span rung from Nun's absolute space and time to the finite AUM system of evolving digital consciousness fractals does constitute a rather big conceptual bite for one paragraph. Leaping 4 major reality paradigms in a single bound where each successive level of cosmological understanding must discover its own theory of relativity to enable the next higher level of organization come into view is the intellectual equivalent of eating a large box of cream-filled donuts in one sitting. I hear some of you asking, do we ever get to the bottom, to the absolute, fundamental core within? WHE11 Do we reach the end of the series where we can feel satisfied that we know it all so we can kick back and relax? The short answer is, we, you and me as we play together like fun-loving bacteria in the .PMR petri dish, don't. It appears that we only get to chase that white rabbit, not catch it. Absolutes are indignant and comfortable because their sweeping certainty produces the illusion of an immensely broad and deep knowing, whereas relativity, dependent upon a specific perspective or framework, reminds us of the limitations of our knowledge and experience. It is difficult for many to see themselves as a little guy in a local reality. Absolutes give us a way to skate over the nitty-gritty details of a more complex existence and at the same time feel good, as well as smug, that we have a clear view all the way to infinity. Whenever one's conceptualization of reality, or of anything real, rests upon the absolute, the infinite, or the perfect, one should question the underlying assumptions very closely and expect to find a belief at the core. So, our mission, if we choose to accept it, is low iteratively smash each old absolute with a less constrained vision of a new relativity, a new set of relationships that define a bigger picture that better explains the whole of our direct personal experience. 650 My big TOE preliminaries. Are we caught in an endless iterative loop of ever-increasing bigger pictures? Null endless sounds like another one of those bogus infinity scams. You are not in an endless loop, you are just stuck with your limitations. Our consciousness and our virtual PMR are Burrow-defined INW existence by the constraint placed upon us. Limitations are a natural, unavoidable part of the fundamental existence and experience we call real ity. One thinks being small like a bacterium sucks. It is probably because one has delusions of grandeur and is in denial about one's designed inability to be omniscient. Evolution generally runs a very efficient organization, and being omniscient simply isn't required for you to fully achieve your present purpose. Don't sulk, instead appreciate the beauty of the idea that PMR and NPMR are simply different perspectives of a concept, one equally elegant unified view of reality as an evolving fractal system of digital consciousness that models beings, objects, and energy in order to pull itself up by its bootstraps INW a more profitable state of organization. The definition of beings, objects, and energy are the same in PMR and NPMR. In PMR, physical objects and energy form the set of all non-sentient things. Let's revisit the definition of sentient. The dictionary defines sentient as having sense, perception, conscious, experiencing sensation or feeling. I will again generalize this official PMR definition by saying that sentient entities are self-aware and aware of their environment. Additionally, sentient entities make deliberate choices that have significant consequences to themselves and perhaps to others. Recall that the origins and evolution of self-awareness are discussed in detail in Chapter 25, Book 1. The upper echelons of sentient things are often called beings, though technically everything sentient is a being. In NPMR, objects and energy are defined in exactly the same way. Objects and energy within NPMR represent all the things in NPMR that are not sentient in NPMR. Thus, the phrase, beings, objects, and energy includes everything when applied to either PMR or NPMR. The beings are the choice makers, the objects include other things, and the energy state relative to a set of objects is NEI. They're a being nor an object but has the ability to effect changes in both. Most of the significant, within the big picture, changes that occur between time increments within a given reality are driven by the interactive free will choices of the beings who inhabit that reality. Objects, such as rocks, mountains, clouds, thermal geysers or rivers, and interactive forms of energy, storms, volcanic eruptions, or earthquakes, for example, are very predictable when one has all the data. Beings, objects, and energy do, however, sometimes have random components associated with their choices. Some degree of randomness, usually relatively small q, may influence what happens next. Book 3, Section 5, Chapter 75 I 651. Our practical, from a PMR viewpoint, definition of physical and non-physical reflect the common separation, particularly in the West, between mental and physical, mind and body, even though it is obvious to almost everyone that these two opposites are hopelessly entangled and integrated. PMR and NPMR are likewise entangled. The directly unmeasurable, within PMR, mind, consciousness, thought, and soul clearly fall into the non-physical, from a PMR viewpoint, camp regardless of whether or not there is a presumed physical basis. In summary, our operational definition of PMR causes some of the common things taken seriously, believed in and relied on, in physics, such as neutrinos, quarks, and string theory, to belong in the non-physical camp, only enumerable, not directly measurable, yet, we accept them because they help us remain logically consistent and represent the current best fit within, are sometimes required by, our model of physical reality. We can build useful and valuable material, conceptual, theoretical, and spiritual results based on the knowledge and understanding of inferred non-physical objects. Successful operational experimentation with non-physical phenomena that are not acceptable to you. Additional science, such as energy and information transfers within New Jersey JVIR or PMR that appear to the PMR observer to be acausal, often employs the methodologies that physicists use to work with interred objects such as neutrinos, as well as the processes that scientists use to develop more purely conceptual objects like wave packets or swings. Science is science. Many of the same logical approaches to discovery work as well in PMR as they do in PMR. The major difference is that NPMR objects are not accepted by traditional scientists because they do not fit the little picture PMR reality model. For TL1E most part, this is because the type of data gathered from NPMR and the process for obtaining and validating them is, by its nature and design, mostly incompatible with PMR's additional murally focused scientific methodology, which is based upon a mystical belief in the universality of PMR causality. See chapters 13 and 14 of Book 2, and Chapter 2 of THL's book for supporting detail. Conflicting with the 19th and 20th century's most precious intellectual jewel, the scientific method, is not necessarily the kiss of death to an open mind. The scientific method is a terrific tool within the realm to which it applies. Our most successful scientific models and processes have turned out to have a limited validity, including classical mechanics, large slow objects, special relativity, fast objects, but no gravity, the flat earth, Schoen distances, or a stable physical universe, short times. Likewise, the scientific 652 my big TOE preliminaries method has a limited validity. Our refusal to appreciate those limitations has trapped our awareness in PMR. The time is ripe, once again, to raise our thinking up to the next level of generality, thus greatly expanding our vision of what is possible. An expanded view of a scientific method that contains the traditional scientific method as a subset would also better encompass and support some presently accepted fields including medicine, psychology, sociology, and ethics, as well as the non-traditional, but equally serious, fields of cosmology, epistemology, and ontology. For example, when was the last time the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC, performed an objective scientific public health experiment with a highly contagious deadly infectious disease? Obviously, the CDC cannot apply a traditional scientific methodology to the study of fatal infectious diseases. Instead, it must rely on indirect statistical inference, the same methodology that is often used to produce an objective evaluation of subjective experience. A generalized scientific method must be rigorous and testable, as well as produce consistent and meaningful results. The requirement for testable rigor and meaningfulness in no way eliminates the value and usefulness of subjective input. Formally defining a practical generalized scientific method is not within the scope or intent of this trilogy, but an informal description of what needs to be included is discussed in the previous chapter and in Chapter 13, Book 2. Your attitude is important. Avoid getting twisted around the preciseness, accuracy, or the appropriateness of how the definitions and observations within this Chapter 1 and the next apply to your particular view of, and beliefs about, the world. Keep in mind that we are trying to effect a communication of big ideas. Some fuzziness among the details is acceptable, precision and clarity comes only with personal experience in the larger reality. Jettisoning belief and trying to solidly grasp what lies beyond your experiential reach is what pulls you up by your bootstraps, but overreaching coupled with high expectations typically leads to more frustration than progress. Again, do not feel required to believe or disbelieve or to pass final judgment on what you read. On the other hand, you are required to be scientifically, not driven by belief or fear, critical and skeptical of what you find here, or your big toe will not grow. 76. Some observations. These 13 observations reflect my experience exploring NPMR and provide a short summary of the data necessary to support the conceptual development of the mechanics of reality. they are written here as unsupported blunt summary statements. Sections 2, 3, and 4 of my big TOE thoroughly develop the logical foundation upon which these 13 observations rest. LF Your personal experience does not clearly encompass and support these statements. Consider them to be stated assumptions that may or may not be critical. What follows in the next 9 chapters. Keep in mind that belief or disbelief in the correctness of these observations is at best irrelevant, while a skeptical open mind is absolutely necessary. LF, on the other hand, your personal experience validates these notions. They will appear to be simple facts that stand on their own, requiring neither belief nor conjecture for support. Regardless of the level of experience you bring to this discussion, my advice is to trudge on through this chapter without being too issy. The supporting details are contained in the Phil SL2 books of this trilogy and WIJL not be repeated here. This is simply a terse summary and review of what has been established elsewhere within my big TOE. 1 PMR is not the only, and not necessarily the primary, nor the most important reality. Each reality exists within its own calculation space or dimension. Realities are not necessarily independent. There can be correlations and dependencies between realities along with rules governing their interactions. 2. As shown in Figure 5:1, there are multiple, loosely related, weakly interacting reality systems within NPL\1LR, each NPMR0 where n equals 1, 2, 3, represents a specific reality system. Each of the NPMR11 seems to be 654 I my big TOE some observations. NPMRN plus 2. Figure 5.1, Reality Systems, the Big Picture. Organized as separate ongoing experiments in consciousness. Each experiment has its own objectives, protocols, conditions, timeline, and purpose. 3. One of these reality systems within NPMR, say 1 PMRN, where the index O takes the specific value n, contains RPL\1IR as a subset. NPMRN is a spiritual, quality of consciousness, system experimenting with the evolutionary potential of consciousness. NPMRN contains many other reality subsets besides PMR. Some of these other subsets constitute physical universes similar, space-time matter-based, to OMPMR. We are non-physical to the beings of these realities, while others are very different from our PMR, not based on space-time matter. Within each of these reality subsets, there are types and classes of beings living within the rules of their own physics, psychology, and sociology. Our system, OS, of reality contains PMR and a portion of LPMRN. Figure 5:1 shows only one small portion of the larger consciousness ecosystem. 4. In NPMRN, the goal for each sentient being is to learn, grow, and evolve through interaction, making choices, with others. The intent driving our choices can range from good to evil. We make free will choices in the process of interacting with other sent.im beings, and the quality of TJ1SA choices alters the entropy of our consciousness through a self-modifying. Book 3, Section 5, Chapter 76 I 655. Feedback System. Personal growth is required to affect our entropy reducing evolution to the larger consciousness cycle. To optimize entropy loss, one must understand how consciousness evolves under varying conditions. Does all consciousness eventually end up love-like, the optimal result, or exactly the opposite, or does a consciousness system eventually become chaotic or perhaps find some stable equilibrium state in between these extremes? Is it possible to isolate and stabilize optimal conditions for growing or evolving high-quality consciousness, thus optimizing the efficiency of the consciousness cycle? 5. All consciousness in NPMRN is netted. It is as though each entity in NPMRN has a unique URL, Uniform Resource Locator 0R or web address, in a gigantic, but finite, reality wide web, RWV. Thus, as a subset, all beings in OU1 particular PMR are also netted T0 together, on a local area network, LAN, so to speak, as well as connections between LANs, with the rest of OS and all other NPMRN residents. Connections to the NPMR11 and beyond are likewise available, but not particularly important to this discussion. 6. An individual in PMR can be aware of NPMR through his or her mind, the non-physical part of one's being. The mind is the doorway through which you must pass to experience NPMR. NPMR is, if anything, more real than PMR, semantics in the service of an impish smile, because it contains a more fundamental, less constrained, reality of which PMR is only one of many subsets. 7. An individual in PMR, once fully aware in NPMRN, can access and filter the RWW net described above with his or her intent. An individual can access any web page entity on this RWW net by using his or her intent, which requires unique knowledge and identification of the URL being sought. One navigates with one's intent. A person's intent is also his or her filter. Without this filter one would have difficulty dealing with all the information at once. Explorers must learn THE.IR way around by exploring the RWW, for the same general reasons that force you to personally explore the WWW. Reading about it and being an interactive part of it are two entirely different experiences. Experience, carefully filtered by a scientific method, repeatable evidential data collection, that sorts external signal from internal noise, leads to the knowledge that forms the basis for a larger set of productive and meaningful possible intents. Those who wish to access information, objects, or entities on the RWW consciousness network need to educate themselves within and about NPMRN. Carefully validated first-hand experience must be acquired through a step-by-step exploratory process. 656. My big TOE some observations. 8. Individual communications between semi and emitters are telepathic. Additionally, within a given PMR, communication using sensory data, such as sight, sound, touch, smell, and taste, typically functions in parallel with telepathy to some degree. 9. People in PMR who are unaware, or most unaware, within NPMR, can use and experience this net if they are connected strongly enough, large enough signal to noise, and with enough dear intent, interest, to produce a cross-stalk or bleed through into their consciousness, typically perceived as intuition or precognitive dreams. Signals come from NPMR with varying amplitudes while an individual produces most of his own interfering noise. 10. Telepathic communications and other communications through the NPMRN net are not affected by the apparent distance or volume between the sender and the receiver, nor limited by light speed. Communication content flows across dimensional barriers without difficulty. 11. Beings in all PMRs within PMRN have portions or extensions of themselves that also, simultaneously, exist in NPJ_1FRN. The body in PMR is essentially sustained through IL connection to NPMRN. By manipulating energy, the ability to reorganize bits, in NPMRN, one can affect the body in PMR. Thus follow many effects from mental or psychic healing to voodoo. The ENE1GY body in NPMRN can be viewed from various frequencies, like looking at something with X-ray, infrared, or ultraviolet light, to reveal different aspects of itself. I apologize to Al-J the scientists and engineers for using the frequency metaphor, but it is the best analogy I can come up with. The energy body is easily manipulated by intention. 12. Intent seems to have the qualities of magnitude, intensity, frequency, is lunable, and clarity, signal-to-noise ratio. 13. The energy body in PJ_IIRN does not die when the physical body dies, it can manifest another body in PMR, or some other suitable reality, if it needs 01 wants 1. 77. A model of reality and time. Incrementing time in simulations. To understand reality one must understand time. Wanting the next 6 chapters, we will use the notations delta t and delta t extensively. Because this notation is borrowed from the field of mathematics, it may seem strange to some, but do not be put off by that. TI1 is chapter provides an explanation of incrementing time in simulations to the mathematically challenged and introduces a unique perspective on the nature of time to the big picture reality challenged. The words delta and delta represent the upper and lowercase Greek letter of the same name. They are spelled out to avoid using abstract symbols that might inadvertently trigger Mat J1 phobia or other related mental techno blocks. This is easy, you'll see. Traditional mathematical Tatyon places the Greek letter delta next to a variable, some quantity that changes, to represent an increment, small change, in that variable. I use it here because many people are familiar with this notation. If you are not, don't worry, tile concept is simple and explained in detail below. Delta t and delta t are simply names for two different increments, small chunks, of time. Ln an iterative dynamic simulation, SUD1 as the calculation of the position of a fired artillery round, or a thrown ball, as a function of time, 1 art with the equations of motion, equations giving position as a function of time, and the initial conditions at time t equals 0. The first time till rough tile computational process loop, 1 lets t equals, delta t, and TL1 and calculates position, next time through t equals 2, delta t, next time through L equals 3, delta t, next time through t equals 4, delta t, and so on. You calculate a new position of the object, artillery round or ball, for each time t, which is 1 delta t. 658 my big TOE incrementing time in simulations. Larger than the previous value oft. Consequently, time, in your calculation of position, progresses forward by increments, small discontinuous jumps, of delta t. Your simulation can approximate continuous time, and thus continuous motion, by making the size of delta t very small. The cumulative sum over the delta t is called simulation time because it drives the dynamic simulation, as opposed to real time, which is what is measured by the clock on the computer room wall. If the equations were complex enough and delta t were small enough and the computer slow enough, it could take several hours of real time to progress the artillery round's trajectory through only a 2 seconds of simulation time, perhaps only a few hundred feet of a much longer trajectory, within the computer simulation. On the other hand, relatively simple equations in a very fast computer using a larger delta t might simulate a 1-minute long trajectory, such as the trajectory of a large artillery round, in only a few tenths of a second of real time. The simulation can be paused any amount of real time between consecutive time increments and subsequently started up again without disturbing the results of the simulation. These concepts involving notions of dynamic simulation and time will be important later on. It is good to understand them now while the context is simple. Consider a large simulation that contains smaller simulations within it. For example, let's imagine a simulated war containing several simultaneous interactive battles. Such a system simulation may contain a subset of code, subroutine, that simulates a specific battle, which has within it another iterative subset of code, lower-level subroutine, that simulates a specific armor battalion's activity within that battle, which has within it a yet another iterative subset of code, even lower-level subroutine, that simulates an artillery shell fired by that armor battalion. We now have 4 nested, one inside the all levels of interdependent subroutines, 1 overall war, 2 specific battles, 3 specific battalions, 4 individual artillery trajectories, iterating their way sequentially to produce the simulated war. The collection of algorithms that describe the interdependencies between levels, specify the assumptions, initial conditions, tactics, rules of engagement, and describe the performance of each subsystem and component, are said to model or simulate the war. A properly integrated collection of such models, along with the structure of the code that orders and propagates interactive logical evenels, passes data, collects results, and increments time, defines the overall war game or simulation. This is how computers are used. To simulate a set of interactive activities or a dynamic process. Book 3, Section 5, Chapter 77 I 659. All the interdependent loops are iterated sequentially. Loops that have no interdependency may be incremented in parallel, simultaneously. Each level and each process within each level progresses its own dynamic active ity by one delta t at a time. As activities are completed, decisions made, trajectories flown, damage assessed, troops and equipment moved, and ammunition depleted, information is passed back and forth among the FEM levels. The results and implications of this information are used to make choices, continue or modify processes, and keep score. Thus, as the simulation time progresses delta t by delta t, the simulated war grinds on. The practical size of delta t depends on the required accuracy and the speed of the fastest elements in our model. A typical delta t might be 0.00001 seconds if the precise locations, to within a centimeter, of things such as artillery rounds and missiles were important. In this simulation, delta t defines the fundamental quantum of simulation time. If the fast.s thing in our war simulation, an ancient war perhaps, or a modern one where all the gadgets don't work, was a man running through the bushes. With a sp1 a delta t of 0.1 second would probably be small enough. Would simulating an ancient, spear-throwing, or slow-moving war, requiring a time base of no more than delta t equals 0.1 second, with our modern war simulator, that ticks off time in 0.00001 second increments, be a problem? No, there is no problem as long as we are simulating something that can be adequately modeled with time increments that are equal to or larger than 0.00001 seconds. It would make no sense to simulate the position of a running man every 0.00001 seconds. It might allow for a more detailed and complex model of the man, including blinks, burps, hair motion, progressive cell damage, and whiches. However, a man's movement within that small of a time increment, 0.00001 sec, is completely inconsequential to the war. What we would most likely do is use our previous course or low fidelity man movement model and increment it by a single 0.1 second increment every 10,000, 10, ticks of our simulation time clock. Our war game's fundamental quantum of simulation time is still equal to 0.00001 seconds or low section. We are now incrementing our man model in 0.1 second increments as a subroutine within a larger model, outer loop, that iterates EVE 11 0.00001 seconds. This will turn out to be a crucial concept later. This more efficiently incremented, low-fidelity man model, it remains detailed enough to define troop movement of 5 a function of terrain, is purposely designed to be only as accurate, and incremented only as often, as il needs to be to serve the purpose that is intended by the overall simulation. Likewise, the loops and subroutines that represent various players in 660 my big TOE incrementing time in simulations. The simulation are provided the dynamic granularity, increment size, that their function requires. The one with the smallest required increment serves as the metronome, the fundamental quantum of time within our simulation, for all the others. Let's put this all together into one big war simulation. We will have man model subroutines that are incremented by 1/10 of a second every 10 increments of our fundamental simulation time. We will also have tank model subroutines that are incremented by 1/100th of a second every 10 ticks of the fundamental clock. We might have aircraft model subroutines that are incremented by 1,000th of a second every 102 ticks of the fundamental clock, and missile subroutines that are incremented every third tick of the fundamental clock, and perhaps a nuclear damage propagation subroutine that will be incremented, evaluated, every tick of the fundamental clock. In this simulation, the master loop or simulation driver is the one requiring the smallest time increment. The guy in charge, outermost loop, is the one with the smallest time increment. The local time inside the man model loop jumps ahead 1/10 second at a time. The low-fidelity simulated men who live in that local reality measure a quantum of their time as 1/10 second. From their perspective, real time accumulates in increments of 1/10 second. 1/10 second is their local time quanta. If they could become sentient and learn to program, they could decide to simulate the growth of their hair and toenails because these functions change slowly compared to their time quantum. Let's summarize the most useful ideas that have been generated by this discussion of dynamic simulations. Some of the time loops, subroutines, or dimensions of our big picture, entire war, simulation are iterated at faster RALs than others. Apparent real-time is relative to each loop's perspective or local reality. Within a given local reality, we can only perceive events which produce effects that are significant over one local time quanta or more, thus rendering the activities of faster loops, smaller time quanta, invisible and incomprehensible. Within the hierarchy of causality, simulations within simulations or dimensions within dimensions, the Ma5-ter, or outermost loop that drives everything else, is defined as the one with the highest fundamental frequency, highest sampling rate or rate of iteration, which is the same as saying it has the smallest quantum of time. Bells should be going off in your head relating this discussion of computer simulation he discussion of AUM's fundamental frequency and time quantum, and the differing sized quamma of time in NPMR and PLVIR. Book 3, Section 5, Chapter 77 I 661. Chapter 31, Book 1. Each higher level of simulation, with its smaller time quanta, represents a larger perspective, a base of authority and control, and collects, processes and synthesizes the activities and results created by its lower level, inner, subordinate simulations. Dynamic timing loops within loops within loops, all interconnected and building one upon the other at various levels of scale. Do you notice the fractal-like characteristics of time loops within your dynamic reality? Do you get a glimmer of how everything is interrelated and interconnected within a generalized dynamic consciousness evolution fractal ecosystem? You will see later that what I define as delta t represents the outer, controlling, loop of our immediate reality within OS. Delta t is used to calculate probable realities and is referred to as simulation time. It is related to time in NPMR. On the other hand, delta t, a larger time increment, is defined as the increment that accumulates our PMR time, our apparent real time. From a larger perspective, delta t drives a lower level simulation, with its larger ti.me increment, incremented only once every so many ticks of the overall simulation time clock within the big computer. Did I infer that you, me, and our entire universe, are simulated beings and objects? Yes, you will see that it is illuminating, consistent, and useful to model our reality that way. Throughout M.Y. Big TOE, I have dangled this idea of a simulated reality in front of you. As strange as it may seem, it will make more sense later on. Recall that in Chapter 31, Book 1, I explained that time is quantized, meaning that time progresses by discrete increments rather than continuously, and that our time is an artificial construct created by AUM to define the space-time part of itself. In this section, you will see how quantized time loops allow us to create our reality, maintain a living history, and make choices that enable us to learn and to grow the quality of our consciousness, evolve our spiritual quality towards satisfying the goals of our existence. A digital reality offers up many interesting attributes. You will soon see that time is not a fundamental property of the thread that is woven to produce the fabric of reality, but instead is merely a measurement construct, a tool for implementing organization and defining patterns, more related to the action of the machine that does the weaving than to the thread itself. Each cycle of the loom represents another time increment as thread after thread is added to produce the seemingly continuous fabric of our PMR 3D space-time experience. The action of the machine, the process of weaving, should not be confused with the three-dimensional experience of the space-time fabric it creates. Nor should the fabric be seen to weave itself through some 662 my big TOE incrementing time in simulations. Spontaneous mystical or magical process wherein time is created in the present moment without the need of factory or loom or the energy that makes them run, much less the design and purpose of the process. That space-time is spontaneously self-created from nothing, a self-woven, 4D fabric containing all past, present, and future events, is basically what most scientists believe these days because they cannot perceive the higher dimensions where the loom, mill, and the energy that runs them resides. In fact, our present science is based on the fundamental implicit assumption that the loom and mill cannot possibly exist, or be relevant, because they lie beyond our direct objective 3D perception of a 4D space-time. Thus, today's scientists have painted themselves into a corner dependent upon reality mysteriously creating itself, a mystical belief-based concept they are greatly dissatisfied with and do not like to talk about, a fundamental failure of scientific understanding long swept under the rug of objective respectability. On the other hand, the theists are content, as they have been for 10,000 years, offer up their one pat answer for all situations and exercises, God does it. Meanwhile, the fabric of space-time continues to apparently weave itself out of nothing as we stumble in circles in pursuit of a big picture that we can somehow miraculously extract from our little picture. And that is where we are today, ladies and gentlemen, and where we have been for the last 40 years since general relativity and quantum mechanics dropped the first shoe, told us in no uncertain terms that our physical reality was delusional. Einstein tried to lead us out of that wilderness with unified field theory but could not find his way through the impenetrable cult-mall belief fog that obscured every avenue of escape. Belief blindness is as absolute as any blindness. That a higher dimensional structure may not leave physical footprints is not that difficult to understand. Einstein was correctly looking for non-physical footprints in his unified field theory where mass was nothing more than higher intensity field strength. His error was looking for one continuous fields within the space-time construct. He did not grasp the digital nature of reality, that space and time are quantized, and that space-time itself was only a local phenomenon, a virtual little picture reality dependent upon a more fundamental digital energy field called consciousness. He did not understand the primacy of consciousness as the fundamental substance, energy, or organization underlying existence. Instead of seeing space-time as primordial physics, a set of relationships and definitions, a rule set, a construct of consciousness, he thought that. Book 3, Section 5, Chapter 77 I 663. Space-time itself was a fundamental field. Consciousness is fundamental. Space-time is derived from a conscious intent to constitute an individuated subcell of consciousness to a specific experience base which we call PLVIR. Even if Einstein had figured that out in the 1950s, his peers would have written him off as having lost it. He would have most likely ended his career in ridicule. Today we are much more familiar with the potential of the digital sciences. Perhaps now, in the 21st century, scientists will have the requisite vision to see and understand the paradigm shifts that are required to support a unified theory of reality. Perhaps non-scientists will recognize the big picture first and eventually bring the scientists along. Tracking the non-physical footprints of a more fundamental reality through the consciousness wilderness is what my big TOE is all about, and you do not need to be a physicist or mathematician to get it because the details and explanations are not little picture logic puzzles that exist only within PMR. In the big picture, a deep understanding of reality is not the exclusive preserve of the scientist and mathematician. That state of affairs, where scientists are the high priests of reality, is a little picture phenomenon only. When it comes to understanding the big picture, the are no academic prerequisites. You do not need to wait for the science guys and mathematicians to lead this parade. March on to the beat of your own experience and inner knowing and they will eventually follow your lead. It is as though the objects and the simulation, local AJ guys within each subroutine, have become sentient but can't perceive outside their time loop level and consequently, are oblivious to, or vehemently deny, the big GER picture. They live in their limited universe, paying homage to the loop gods who occasionally provide fresh input data and lo whom they offer up the results of their efforts. 78. A model of reality and time. The big computer, TBC. We have previously discussed the likely origins of an immense digital computational capacity based upon binary reality cells that are the fundamental constituent of aware consciousness or mind. LN Section 2, Chapters 26, 27, and 28 of Book 1, you learned how and why a UO would naturally evolve binary, distorted versus non-distorted, reality cells in support of organizing and exploring, in the evolutionary sense, increasing complexity and developing awareness. You also learned how AUM would further refine at 5 computational and memory part to develop intention, move from dim awareness to bright awareness, and to implement and track its Gedenlian experiment 5 in consciousness. Awareness cannot grow, progress, learn, or evolve past a very rudimentary level without the organizing influence of time. The words learn and grow imply the passage, or incrementing of time. There must exist a before state and an after state if awareness, or any system for that matter, has the potential to learn or grow. The notion of the possibility of change is dependent upon the existence of at least a rudimentary time. As you will soon see, our discrete, quantized, time-based reality has evolved, has been designed, to provide us with an opportunity to learn, and co-provide AUM with optimized results from its Gedenlian experiments concerning the optimization of evolutionary process. The complex configuration of digital energy, organization, and self-organizing process we call consciousness forms the foundation of reality in the form of an interactive consciousness evolution fractal ecosystem simulation where what is actual and what is simulated are one in the same. 666 I My Big TOE The big computer. You can conceptualize TBC as a tiny piece of the computational and memory part of AUM that is used, among other things, to actualize and maintain the reality of OS and its offspring. For the purpose of explaining consciousness, quantized time, past, present, and future, time travel, free will, rule sets, spacetime, precognition, telepathic communication, remote viewing, ego, love and much more in this model of reality, one evoke only those attributes of this celestial computer that our PMR computers have. In other words, this supercomputer in NPMRN that I have assumed into existence primarily differs from the functional computer on our desktops by size, memory, computational speed, reliability, and reasonably good software, that's all. This aside is for all the computer geeks in the reading audience who are waving their hands in the air and have troubled expressions on their faces. Others can skip to the end or take a short break until the computer wizards catch up. It may make more sense to the computer literate if they imagine that TBC is composed of fully netted, massively parallel arrays of clustered processors with integrated, shared, and standalone super-fast memory running within a highly efficient self-evolving AUM operating system that is beyond all imagination. In other words, if you can imagine that the AUM digital consciousness thing is completely beyond your imagination, you have taken the first step toward understanding the depth of what you don't know. In an operational sense, one might say that AUM is the operating system as well as the computer and the application software. This AUM thing is an almost infinite, from our perspective, living, evolving, conscious, sentient computer and operating system that develops its own software. At a minimum, it inhabits as well as defines and creates all the digital mind space, reality, that we have the potential to even vaguely comprehend. Other than that, it is an inconsequential pissant. When I say that TBC is like the computer on your desktop, I am referring to the fundamental functional building blocks of binary cells, memory, instruction sets, processors, data flow mechanics, and operating system control, not the specific design of these things or the system architecture. Think of a computer in the most generic terms possible and take care not to limit your imagination by what you presently know about computers. TBC should not be thought of as the big mainframe in the sky, or as the OS department server within N division, but as a metaphor describing the fundamental nature of the process and functionality, computation, memory, and rules, required to implement our reality. Book 3, Section 5, Chapter 78 I 667. TBC is a real thing, we relate to it more by its process and functional ity, discussed in this section, than by its construction and design, discuss it in sections 2 and 4, the same way most of us interact with our desktop computers. We don't relate to chips and basic chip-level instruction sets, but instead see our computers in terms of their functionality and the processes they implement. We are primarily interested in the processes we need co-optimize our interaction with them. The most surprising thing is that TBC, the implementer of all reality within NPL/ILRN, represents nothing mystical, no magic, just a huge, but finite, fast, mundane number cruncher running excellent, but not necessarily perfect, software. The mundaneness of TBC is, by itself, remarkable and interesting. Digital processing is digital processing however cleverly or efficiently it is implemented. The software and operating system might reasonably be construed to represent the intent of AUM, or one may understand it as the result of evolutionary pressure working upon a growing, experimenting, evolving AUM consciousness system being thing exploring all its possible states. TBC, dedicated to NPMRN, represents only one small part of AUM's computational part, other reality systems have their own computational and memory resources. All are interconnected because they are of one consciousness. We use the terms AUM, EBC, and TBC to express differing levels of digital functionality, however, at the root, they are not separate parts. Imagine a single evolving digital system serving multiple functions simultaneously. Trying to differentiate between the larger consciousness system and yourself can be misleading, the boundaries are only functional. AUM, TBC, PMR, and you are all manifestations of a single consciousness. Each differs by function and purpose and is circumscribed by its specific constraints, yet all a one of one continuous consciousness, like the lumps in a sheet. Though the greater consciousness ecosystem is vast and ranges far beyond our view, there is much that lies within the reach of our direct experience and understanding. Humans have barely taken the first baby step toward knowing what is in our ability to know. As we continue to play our part in the larger consciousness cycle of entropy reduction, it is our right as well as our duty, to explore everything between where we are today and the far edge of our potential, to become aware and active participants in the big picture and full partners in the evolution of ourselves and AUM. 79. A model of reality and time. Probable reality surfaces the simulated probable future. Real-time, our system, state vectors, and history. 1. Probable reality. Let us begin this discussion of time and the mechanics of OS, our collective big picture 1. Ocal reality, in the PMR present and slowly work toward a more generalized concept of past and future. Join me here in the present moment and let us see what is happening in NPMRN to support our sense of reality present. The big computer, TBC, has captured in its database the state of being of OS at this moment. This includes all the objects and energy in the universe as well as all the significant choices that all the relevant sentient beings within OS have at this moment. Later in this chapter we will more specifically, and in more detail, define the set of information that specifies the state of being or state vector of our system, OS. TBC can now compute everything that could possibly happen next. We will explore this thought more thoroughly later. Additionally, it has accumulated a history file of past behaviors relative to similar choices and can thus compute the likelihood of occurrence, probabilities, of each of the possible things that could happen next. Many of the totent choices are dependent on a likely interaction with the choices that all relevant and significant others, including themselves, made the moment, or many moments, before. All possible interactions are defined and evaluated with one aspect to all possible. 670 My big TOE probable futures, real-time, our system, state vectors, and history. Choices and arrangements of objects and energy, as well as against a complete set of history-based likelihoods, expectation values. During the time between successive incremental of PMR's quantum of time, delta t, TBC has computed OS's probable future, what OS will probably be like during the next m equals L, 2, 3, m, where m is an integer, iterations of delta t. Thus within TBC, the dynamic OS has been simulated and its future state, the one that will most likely appear during the next delta t, m equals L, has been predicted based on the results of the present state of OS after the last delta t. This OS simulation is run again, m equals 2, with 11 the results from the previous predictive simulation, m equals 1, used as input, and the probable outcomes and expectation values for the following delta t are predicted as output. Each successive output, predict the 11g the state of OS out into the future one more delta t, becomes the input for the next predictive calculation. This process is continued m times until TBC has progressed the model of OS out as far in time as it finds useful. The probable OS state vector generated after each iteration, for each value of m, during the dynamic simulation of what is most likely to happen in OS during the next delta L is saved in TBC. Remember that we are doing OM iterations between actual increments of delta t. As displayed in text box 5 to 1 below, the iterative process would operate in the following manner. First, a new delta t increment is initiated resulting in the initiation of a new OS state vector. Then, all free will choices and material and energetic changes that define the activity that creates this new OS are made. The choices and changes, once made, define a new and unique stale vector, or more simply, state, of OS that is associated with 1 delta t is incremented. 2 free will choices, material changes, and energy changes are made, defining a new OS state vector associated with the Cu1/10 delta t. 3 The new OS state vir.or is compared to the previous one and to the predicted one. 4 All actualized changes between the new and previous OS states are recorded. Predictive algorithms and databases are updated and improved. 5 TBC calculates m sequential probable future states of the new OS by running a delta t subloop. Text box 5.1, the OS/delta t loop. Book 3, Section 5, Chapter 79 I67L. This particular delta t. TBC now compares the new OS state vector to the previous one and records the actualized changes. It also compares the newly actualized state to the predicted state and makes the necessary adjustments required to improve the accuracy of future predictions. Next, TBC calculates m potential future states, of the new OS state. These m calculations, made sequentially one value of m at a time, project, simulate, what is most likely to happen during the next m increments of delta t. The first, m equals 1, potential future state, probable reality, of OS is computed in TBC based on the latest actually happened, input data generated by the choices made during the CW-rent state of OS. This predict-jave simulation of the state of OS, which progresses by iterating m from L to m, creates a set of sequential probable realities describing the probable future of OS. The subroutine or iterative loop we are using to generate future probable realities of OS must, because it is a Dynon-1IC simulation tracking changes, operate CM its own time base, and that time base must utilize a much smaller time increment than delta t. This smaller time increment, which we will call delta t, is associated with a quantum of time in npmrn utilizing a time increment, delta t, that is very much smaller than the PMR quantum of time, delta t, allows us to model the dynamics of OS, which is a subset of npmrn, in enough detail so that we can predict the most likely state of OS for each value of m. Thus, delta t is the fundamental quantum of OS simulation time. The OS state vector simulation runs through its internal calculations using the smaller NPL\1JRN time quanta, delta t, until it eventually converges to a predicted future state of OS for every value of m. It should be clear that the time increment delta t is composed of or contains some large integer number of NPMRR, time quanta delta t, and that the computation of the probable future of OS through m successive generations occurs between successive increments, delta t, of our PMR real time. Now that a set of m successive generations of probable future realities has been determined, TBC next records the entire OS state vector representing all significant possibilities and probabilities existing within OS. This step is discussed in further detail in topic 9 of this chapter. The final step of the OS delta t loop iterates the process by returning the loop back t0, the fast step. Delta t is incremented again, and the entire process is repeated for the new delta t. Let's back our perspective out one more level for a peek at an even big GER picture. Though it lies somewhat beyond our immediate perception, contemplate the concept that delta t is incremented only after so many ticks of a smaller, more fundamental time increment. We know that delta t is a small 672 my big TOE probable futures, real time, our system, state vectors, and history. Time increment, NPMRN time base, used to simulate what is most likely to happen in OS during future delta t time increments. LT is used to simulate probable future states of OS and t increment a larger delta t, the OS delta t loop. For them 10 consider that delta t is incremented only after so many ticks of a smaller time increment that is used to simulate probable future states of NPMRN, the NPMRN delta t dot loop. Because NPMR is an outer loop to NPMRN, where OS lives, it makes sense that NPMR runs on a smaller time quantum than NPMRN. Thus, just as the OS delta t loop must have the smaller delta t as its fundamental quantum of simulation time, the NPMRN delta t loop must likewise have a smaller time increment than delta t as its fundamental quantum of simulation time. Keep in mind that NPMR is a superset of NPMRN, also that NPMRN is a superset of OS and that OS is a superset of our PMR. OS is comprised of our PMR plus a portion of NPMRN. The fundamental increment of a bigger picture simulation time represents an outside loop that provides a larger perspective than NPJ\1FRN. The increment of time of such an outside or higher level loop must be smaller than the fundamental unit of time in NPMRN. Expanding this idea, it is clear that the fundamental increment of NPMR simulation time may likewise be smaller than the fundamental unit of time in NPFVR itself. Is all this clear, or is your head spinning a little? If you are a tad confused, it might be helpful to go back to chapter 5 of this book and refresh your memory on the subject of incrementing time within simulations. Additionally, a glance at figure 5L, at the beginning of chapter 4 in this book, and a peek ahead at the discussion of the even bigger computer, EBC, at the end of chapter 11 might help clarify this bigger picture. Otherwise, if you feel that you mostly get it, absolutely do get it, or don't want to get it any better than you've gotten it, simply go on. In this situation, continuing on, though you find yourself in a light fog, is much better than becoming terminally frustrated. Hang in there. The text gets less technical later. The predictions produced by calculating the probable state of our system M0 ELTAT into the probable future become less accurate the further out in time they go. How EV1 because our computer, TBC, and its software are so good, it can progress PMR time out for many years. M can be arbitrarily large, in less than a nanosecond. The result is a PMR space-time event surface in TBC calculation space. TBC is only a subset of a greater digital mind space. For we 3D creatures constrained to visualize our mental concepts within an experiential 3D structure, it is easier to think of a planar, two-dimensional, event surface. Book 3, Section 5, Chapter 79 I 673. extending out in the dimension of sin-1-related ti1n with probability values, of particular events, on the vertical, up, axis, perhaps so one nothing similar to the surface shown in figure 5-2. The horizontal plane, upon which the peaks rest, contain values of time, TIOML equals 0 at the origin county some simulated future CIN1EM, delta t, the far edge of the event SUEAS being at the TIN1 ECOR responding to M, delta t. Events near the present N101 typically have the highest probability values, sharp tall peaks. The further out one VE go in time the flatter the surface gets, peaks tend to broaden and lose height exhibiting very small, rather diffuse, probability values or likelihoods. Nevertheless, there one may exist a FAVL formed and sizable, 0.8 expectation value, peaks rather far out in TIN 1E. You one night vant to take another peek at figure 5-2. In Sun 1N1 ARI, TBC generates a complete set of probable realities covering everything, choices, things, and energy, most likely to happen bet one veen each delta t and the next. 1. TBC then saves and stores these results describing every unique probable state of OS corresponding to each sin-1-related delta t or each value of M. This coinplet set of probable realities going out M, delta t, in RPTVLR real TI1NE are regenerated after each actual incre 1 and off delta t. For the techies einen UVHO are fretting over the apparent inefficiency of such a process, Ren 1E1 Enber that there is no practical constraint on the consumption of computational resources. Probability T. Figure 5.2, Future Probable Reality Surface. http://www.my-big-toe.com I. 674 My Big Toe I Probable Futures, Real-Time, R System, State Vectors, and History. And, as you will find out later, computing and saving all potential states generates a database of possibility that support a plethora of exceptionally useful analysis that needs no additional computation. I have used the term reality state vector, reality state, or simply state for short, to mean the total description or specification of the state of existing choices, things, and energy that defines OS at the end of a delta t. Late 1 IWIU define more precisely what a reality state vector is, topic 9 below, and describe the process that generates them, chapters 8 through 10 of this book, but first there are a few more basic concepts to be introduced. 1. Introducing real-time. What our clocks measure in PMR? What appears to be real-time is dependent on the relative reality level or loop location of your local perspective within the big picture. PMR real-time appears to be continuous but actually progresses incrementally by iterating the small time increment delta t. During delta t, beings, objects, and energy move and change, free will is exercised, and significant choices are made in PMR. Most changes were as predicted by the M=1 calculation of expectation values, but some were not. Adjustments are made. Again, TBC runs the delta t-based OS simulation. Again it recomputes all the probable realities, OS state vector expectation values through M generations, creating, updating, and storing the event surface as subsequent calculations progress. TBC's computing requirements are not as horrendous as one might first think. Clever software finds updating the complete set, M=L to M=M, of probable realities low be much easier, merely dealing with changes and errors and their downstream impacts, than recomputing everything from scratch every time. It should be dear that what we sense and measure as time, our real time, moves forward in PMR by successive increments of delta t, while probable realities, future expectations, are computed within TBC. Low project the probable future states of OS through M successive simulated increments of delta t. Recall from section 2, chapter 31, book L, that the quantum of time in NPMRN is much smaller than the quantum of time, delta t, in OS and PMR. Thus, during a single delta t of PMR real time, NPMRN has many time increments, quanta, ticking a way in which calculations can be made, probabilities computed, and probable reality surfaces generated. Also, recall that in Chapter 5 of this book we described how the flow of time in a subset or subroutine of the simulation was dependent on its outer controlling loop and that the simulation could be paused, stopped. Book 3, Section 5, Chapter 79 I 675. And then restarted, relative to the clock in the computer room, without causing any effects within the simulation. AUM's fundamental clock is the dock on the computer room wall and we are a subset of NPMR within a subset of NPMR. In other words, NPMR controls PMR's outer controlling loop, while one PMR controls NPMR-S outer loop. The process just described, the generation of OS, resulting from incrementing our real-time quantum delta t and the calculation of our probable futures, raised to the next level of generality, allows for free will choices among sentient residents of NPMRI. In a similar process to that which generates OS, the free will choices of NPMRN residents interact with the beings, objects, and energy of NJ-Vern to CRE8 and actualize successive NPMRN states of being, which in turn enables the generation of NPMR's present and probable future states. As far as I can tell, the digital state flipping AUM consciousness bright awareness thing directly controls NPLVLR's outer loop. 2. How the probable reality surface changes. As previously discussed, PMR real-time moves on as delta t is successively iterated. Not only can the expectation values of a future probability state be computed, but the rate of change of these projected probabilities everywhere on that surface can also be computed as a function of delta t. Because these calculations have been made for a large number of delta t, the history of how the probable reality surface has actually changed with respect to real time is now known. This information, sensitivity of OM probability functions to perturbations, can be used to help calculate better, more accurate probable realities. In fact, this is exactly what has been going on all along. The probable reality surface represents the most likely future possibilities. As the present consumes the surface at the origin, t equals 0, the surface is extended further into the future at the outer perimeter of the disk t equals m, delta t. It might be profitable, though simplistic, to imagine the probable reality surface as a circular plane with t equals 0 at the center and with t spreading out, increasing value, radially in all directions. At once, see figure 5-2. As real-time marches on, the plane disappears, moves, one delta t at a time, into the pinhole at the origin while a new ring, delta t wide is added to its outer edge to maintain a constant radius of m, delta t. The disk is thus made up of m concentric flat rings, with each ring being 1 delta t wide. The pinhole, more correctly, the mathematical point at t equals 0, int O, which the future probable reality surface is being sucked, represents the 676 my big TOE probable futures, real time, our system, state vectors, and history. Present moment. After the present moment, all state vectors are saved. In or words, the present st8 is defined and subsequently saved to a history file, which contains every previous present state. We will see later how these past, previously actualized, states, captured by saving their present state vectors, remain vital and capable of branching T.O new potential virtual reality system within TBC's calculation space whenever additional significant input is introduced. 3. Predicting the future. There will be some peaks on the surface that will have relatively large, stable, and growing values. Some of these may occasionally occur far out in time, the future. These peaks and the events they represent or relate to would be good bets if you were a prognosticator. The narrower and taller the peak, the more precise the prediction and the more likely the event represented is to occur. Thus, we have future events that can be predicted with good reliability coexisting compatibly with individual free will. From the PMR point of view, intentionally or unintentionally tapping into this database of the most probable possible future events seems to, but does not actually, support the concept of predestination. Free will is required to convert probable events into actual events within the present moment. All information on probable futures is fully accessible from a larger perspective, if your intrinsic noise level is low enough, at rww.npmrn.os.pmr/probable reality database/specific event/specific intent. For group futures. Future probable reality surfaces for a particular group, activity, or happening can be computed. Specific summations can be taken over all the choices made by sentient beings and all the changes of objects and energy that have, or are projected to have, an impact or influence on a particular group, family, tribe, organization, corporation, nation, culture, planet, fault line slip, endangered species, rainforest, football team, or human race. The specific group's probable reality surface shows only those probable future events that are significant or related to that group. An individual interested in a specific group's probable future can easily filter all interactions for only those that pertain to that particular one group through a process that is analogous to submitting a database query function where your intent designs and executes the query. A view of the collected events that are defined and limited by the properties of your query intent, along. Book 3, Section 5, Chapter 79 I 677. With their associated probability values, are available to you through the RWW-net. 5. The probable future can change. The rate of change, fluctuations on the surface, of the probability functions for expected events for individuals is much faster than the fluctuations for a large group of individuals. Thus, a nation's future is easier to predict than an individual's, is a more slowly varying and stable surface. The probabilities on the probable reality surface representing our entire planet change even more slowly, allowing for more accurate prognostication. Think of the probable future of a group or organization as the vector summation of all the probable future components of the individuals that affect that group weighted by their likely significance, impact, on the group. In general, the larger the system, the more inertia it has, the less it can be affected by an individual's free will choices or by small random components within objects and energy, and the more stable and reliably predictable its probable reality surface becomes. On the RWW-net, information about these more clear, larger and more stable signal, future events exhibits a higher signal-to-no-fee ratio to everyone, and therefore the information, likelihood of some particular event, is more accessible to more people. Know anybody who claims knowledge of future Earth changes? By the hundreds. 6. Constraining the number of required calculations. The computational burden is not as horrendous as it might seem. Most of the possible choices produced generate the same results and can be quickly dispensed with. Individuals only have influence or impact on a small subset, that may or may not be significant, of the complete set of interactions and choices. Objects, energy, and people with free will are generally more predictable than you might guess, particularly if you have all the historical data. Only a relative few individuals at any one time, even in any 1 year or decade, have the potential to influence or produce major effects as a result of their choices. What they do significantly impacts the choices of many others. Additionally, large subsets of beings, energy, and objects may be functionally independent of each other. For example, Earth-relevant calculations could proceed as an independent set until interaction with specific extraterrestrials, ETS, from elsewhere in our universe occurs. Same for the Pounties. 678 My big TOE probable futures, real-time, our system, state vectors, and history. Furthermore, there are certain rule-set constraints, such as our PMR laws of physics, things never fall up, which further limit the possibilities. Despite the mitigating factors of degeneracy, independent sets, and one constraint 5, computing everything that can happen in the universe and all associated interdependent expectation values, probabilities, is a big job, but it is finite. Fortunately, TBC has no problem performing this task using only a small fraction of its 5 overall capacity. 7. Defining our system, OS, to include ALth players. An interesting side issue is that of manipulated choice. The manipulation, leading, predisposing, or nudging of PMR awareness by those aware in NPMRN is another mechanism through which certain probable outcomes are made more likely than others. In other words, another set of interactions that must be taken into account, as part of the OS calculation space input data, are the actions and free will choices made by those extant in NPMRN, but not in PMR, that directly influence or impact the beings in PMR. This interaction affects the state of OS, and is therefore, by definition, a part of OS. Some of those large, stable, and growing probability peaks exist because they are being encouraged or manipulated by NPMRN residents who may have much larger perspectives, much better information, a much dearer sense of the future, a better, bigger picture, and a more accessibly knowledge base than PMR residents. Consequently, some peaks, likely events, simply happen of and by themselves, others are guided. Most are a mixture of both. TBC calculations relevant to our local one-entity system, OS, must include all beings, objects, and energy in the NPMR1 superset that have an influence upon, or interaction with, our PMR probable reality surface, not only those beings, objects, and energy that exist within OLII PMR subset. TBC and its software, which can be clever, and does not have to execute a simple brute force approach, are by design thorough and precise in calculating and tracking the facts, possibilities, and probabilities of our system, OS. OS creates or actualizes its larger reality through the choices of all its interactive beings, embodied or not, and the randomness of all its interactive objects and energy, physical or non-physical. Changes must abide by the PMR space-time rule set, the NPMRN rule set, the rules of interaction between PMR and NPMRN, and the psi uncertainty principle. Our history, the history of PMR, from a larger perspective, is a subset of the overall history of OS, as European history is a subset of world history. Book 3, Section 5, Chapter 79 I 679. 8 Reality System State Vectors and Our History. During a given real-time increment delta t, beings, objects, and energy may move, or change in some occur way, and choices are made to actualize the new present which is contained within the state vector representing that delta t. All potential choices not made remain unequalized potential states, possible realities, and have associated expectation values. Ti1e complete state vector of OS containing all actualized and unactualized choices is saved in TBC. The ST8 vector that defines or represents OS at a given increment of time, delta t, is the total collection of information and data that completely specifies everything that actually did happen and possibly could happen, every significant possibility within that delta t, along with their associated probable reality surfaces. You will hear more about this later. Thus, the progression of PMR from one delta tt, the next delta t produces or uases a history which is the sum total of all the changes and choices that are actually made or actualized that affect or interact with PMR. This trace becomes an OS history thread representing everything that did happen, or in other words, a sequence of all the states of OS that were actualized during each delta t. The system is not closed. Ti1e system is open, beings, objects, and energy can come and go in and out of effective interaction during any delta t. TBC keeps track of, and up with, everything that is significant interacts with, OS. This process and its results define our particular world, our particular history, our particular universe, one particular virtual reality. We who are interacting are all in this together, so to speak. Our choices define, in our view, a collective thread of continuous happening and unfolding generated by beings interacting with each other and with objects and energy. the OS state vector containing the possibilities and probable reality surfaces not actualized, as well as those that were actualized, is saved at the end of each d.eltat. For this reason, you can, from an awareness in npmr j, visualized past, view it, extract information from it, it is on the RWW, and even make changes to IL that initiate new calculated arrays of unactualized past probable realities. We will discuss this in more detail later. 9. History, still vital after all these years. You can interact with the actualized as well as the potential non-actualized past. When you interact with any pan of IL in such a way as to modify it, introduce a new being, new things, new energy, or a new configuration. 680 My big TOE probable futures, real-time, our system, state vectors, and history. Of old chi_NGS, or change a significant choice or action, a new set of probably futures is computed that incorporates the changes as new initial conditions. A new set of probable reality calculations can now be progressed, creating a new branch, within the non-actualized past database. The nature of this process is like making a copy of a file or simulation program so that you can play what if with it without disturbing the original. Any point along the OS timeline, actualized or not, is a potential branch point, but branches do not spontaneously sprout from every point. They occur only when a significant change in the reality state vector is produced by defining a new and unique set of potentialities. If the change creating new initial conditions is trivial as evidenced by no significant change in the future probable reality surfaces for all reasonable possibilities, not only the most likely ones, then that branch degenerates back to the initial point of departure. Adding a new electron to the system or changing an irrelevant choice, therefore, does not start a new parallel reality in the what-if calculation space of TBC. More of our choices than you would probably guess are irrelevant in the interactive Big Picture 1 Re. In summary, I have described what happens when a change is made to any part or detail of the complete set of everything that could possibly happen, which is computed at the end of each real-time, PMR time, delta t based on the history of all the beings, objects, and energy and on all possible configurations or choices. Because of the small j size of delta t, our PMR history appears to be a continuous thread traced by the collective result of the interactions and choices taken, experienced, or actualized. What has not been actualized up to this point has simply been saved. However, both non-actualized past and probable future states remain operationally viable, allowing the state vector database to be queried and what-if simulations to be executed by intent.